The wind howled like a wounded beast through the Montana mountains, driving snow sideways across the frozen landscape. Pine trees bent and groaned under the weight of ice, their branches snapping like gunshots in the night. The storm had been raging for 3 days now, turning the wilderness into a white hell that swallowed everything in its path. Inside his log cabin, Elias Hart fed another piece of split pine into the stone fireplace. The flames crackled and danced, casting shifting shadows across the rough-hewn walls. He'd built this place with his own hands 5 years ago, after the war had taken everything from him, his family, his faith in humanity, and any desire to rejoin the world of men. The cabin was sparse but functional. A single room with a sleeping area in one corner, a rough table and 2 chairs he'd fashioned himself, shelves lined with preserved food and supplies. Everything a man needed to survive. Nothing more. Elias stood and stretched his back, feeling every one of his 35 years. The old wound in his shoulder ached. It always did when storms rolled in. A Confederate mini-ball had left its mark there at Antietam, along with memories he'd rather forget. His younger brother Samuel hadn't been as lucky. The boy had died in his arms in that blood-soaked cornfield, barely 18 years old. He moved to the window, peering through the frost-covered glass. Nothing but swirling white. The nearest town, Cedar Falls, was 2 days' ride in good weather. In this storm, it might as well be on the moon. That suited Elias fine. He'd had his fill of people, their wars, their greed, their endless capacity for cruelty. The coffee pot on the iron stove had just begun to steam when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. Faint, barely audible over the wind, but unmistakably human. Knocking. Elias froze, his hand instinctively moving to the Winchester rifle mounted above the fireplace. Nobody came out here. Nobody even knew about this cabin except old Jake at the trading post, and Jake knew better than to send anyone his way. The knocking came again. Weaker this time. 3 soft raps that seemed to use up the last of someone's strength. Against his better judgment, Elias moved to the door. His hand gripped the iron latch as he called out, "Who's there?" No answer, just the howling wind. He lifted the rifle, cocked it, and yanked open the door. What he saw made him lower the weapon immediately. A figure collapsed on his doorstep. A woman, barely visible beneath layers of torn fabric and crusted snow. Her lips were blue, her skin translucent as porcelain. Ice crystals clung to her dark hair. And her dress, what he could see of it, was ripped and stained with what might have been blood. For a moment, Elias just stood there, his mind struggling to process the impossible sight. Then, survival instinct kicked in. He slung the rifle over his shoulder and scooped the woman into his arms. She weighed next to nothing, like a bird made of ice and cloth. He kicked the door shut behind them and carried her to the fire. Her body was rigid with cold, her breathing so shallow he had to lean close to feel it against his cheek. Working quickly, he laid her on the bearskin rug near the hearth and began the grim work of trying to save her life. First, the wet clothes had to go. Modesty be damned. Hypothermia didn't care about propriety. He peeled away the frozen layers, his calloused hands working with surprising gentleness. Beneath the ruined dress, her body was a map of hardship. Too thin, ribs visible beneath pale skin, old bruises yellowing on her arms. He wrapped her in his warmest blankets, then set about making pine needle tea, an old remedy his grandmother had taught him for warming the blood. As the water heated, he knelt beside her and began rubbing her hands and feet, trying to restore circulation. The skin was like marble, cold and hard. "Come on," he muttered, working her fingers between his palms. "Don't you die on my floor. Woman, I've seen enough death for one lifetime." Slowly, painfully slowly, color began to return to her extremities. Her breathing deepened. When her eyelids fluttered, Elias felt something in his chest he hadn't experienced in years, relief for another human being. Her eyes opened. They were green, the color of spring grass, though clouded with pain and confusion. She tried to speak, but only managed a croak. "Easy," Elias said, reaching for the tea. "Don't try to talk yet. You're safe." He helped her sit up enough to sip the warm liquid. She drank greedily, her hands shaking so badly he had to hold the cup steady. When she'd had enough, she sank back against the blankets. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw. Elias settled back on his heels, studying her. Now that the immediate danger had passed, questions flooded his mind. Who was she? How had she found his cabin in this storm? And what in God's name was she doing out here alone? She must have seen the questions in his eyes because she struggled to sit up again, clutching the blankets around her shoulders. "My name is Lila Monroe," she said, each word seeming to cost her effort. I'm your mail-order bride." Elias stared at her like she'd spoken Chinese. "My what?" "Your bride. You sent for me. Nearly a year ago." She fumbled at her side, seeming to search for something. Then, remembering her clothes were gone. "The letter. It's in my dress pocket." "Lady, I think the cold has addled your mind. I never sent for any bride." Her green eyes flashed with something, desperation, maybe, or determination. "Please, check the pocket. The letter is there." More to humor her than anything. Elias retrieved her frozen dress from where he'd laid it by the fire. The fabric was stiff with ice, but he found an inner pocket and pulled out an oilcloth packet. Inside was a letter, the ink blurred but still readable. His own handwriting stared back at him. The memory hit like a physical blow. Last winter, after Jake had brought whiskey along with the supplies, Elias had been drunk for 3 days, drowning the anniversary of Samuel's death in rot-gut liquor, somewhere in that haze, egged on by Jake's stories of men finding wives through matrimonial advertisements. He'd written this letter. He read his own words with growing horror, seeking a strong woman unafraid of hardship, willing to share a simple life far from civilization. He'd even sent money for passage. "I was drunk," he said flatly, handing the letter back. "Out of my mind with grief and whiskey. I'm sorry you came all this way, but I can't. I don't want a wife." Something shifted in her face. Not surprise, exactly, but a kind of weary acceptance, as if she'd expected this. She drew the blankets tighter around herself. "I have nowhere else to go. Soon as this storm breaks, I'll take you to Cedar Falls. They can—" "No!" The word came out sharp, desperate. She caught herself, lowering her voice. "Please, I can't go to any town. I can work. I can cook, clean, help with whatever needs doing. I won't be a burden." Elias studied her more carefully. Beneath the exhaustion and cold, he saw something else. Fear. Real, bone-deep terror that had nothing to do with the storm. "You running from something," he said. It wasn't a question. She met his gaze steadily. "Aren't we all?" The truth of that statement hit closer to home than Elias cared to admit. He stood, running a hand through his dark hair. Outside, the storm raged on, sealing them in this cabin together whether he liked it or not. "There's a cot in the storage room," he said finally. "I'll set it up by the fire. You can stay until the storm passes and you're strong enough to travel. After that," he shrugged, "we'll figure something out." "Thank you," she said again, and something in the way she said it, like she hadn't expected even this much kindness, made his chest tighten. He busied himself with arranging the sleeping space, trying not to think about how long it had been since another person had been in his home, trying not to notice the way the firelight caught in her dark hair, or how young she looked, mid-20s at most, a decade younger than him. When he'd finished with the cot, he found her watching him with those green eyes. "I'll earn my keep," she said quietly. "I promise you that." Elias just nodded and turned away. He had the sinking feeling that this storm had brought more than just snow to his doorstep. It had brought complications he'd spent 5 years avoiding, wrapped in the form of a half-frozen woman who claimed to be his bride. God help them both. The morning brought weak sunlight filtering through the frost-covered windows, though the storm still raged outside. Elias woke to find Lila already up, standing uncertainly by the cold stove in his oversized shirt and wool trousers he'd given her the night before. Her own clothes hung drying by the fire. "You should be resting," he said, his voice rough with sleep. She turned, and he noticed how she favored her left side. "I've rested enough, may I?" She gestured toward the stove. He nodded, watching as she moved with practiced efficiency despite her obvious pain. Within minutes, she had the fire going and coffee brewing. She found his meager supplies, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, and set about making what breakfast she could. "You don't have to," he began. "I said I'd earn my keep." Her tone brooked no argument, though he caught the slight tremor in her hands as she worked. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the wind battering the walls. Elias found himself stealing glances at her. In daylight, he could see more clearly the toll of whatever journey had brought her here. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her cheekbones stood out too sharply, and there was a wariness in her movements, like a deer ready to bolt. After breakfast, she insisted on cleaning up, then set about tidying the cabin. Elias tried to return to his usual routine, checking his traps from the window, mending harness leather, but found himself distracted by her presence. She moved quietly, efficiently, finding tasks he hadn't even realized needed doing. She swept floors that hadn't seen a broom in months, organized his scattered supplies, even mended a tear in his spare shirt without being asked. By afternoon, the storm had worsened. Lila had been working steadily for hours when Elias noticed her beginning to sway on her feet. "Enough," he said, more harshly than intended. "Sit down before you fall down." She sank into the chair by the fire, and he saw her bite back a sound of pain. Without asking permission, he knelt beside her and gently pressed his fingers to her ribs through the fabric. She flinched. "Bruised, maybe cracked," he diagnosed. "How long ago?" "Does it matter?" she asked quietly. "It does if you're going to keep pushing yourself like this." She was quiet for a long moment. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Time blurs on the trail. He rose and retrieved a bottle from his medicinal supplies. Willow bark tincture, for the pain. She accepted it gratefully, and he noticed her hands were covered in small cuts and old calluses. Working hands, whatever else she was. She wasn't some pampered Eastern lady playing at adventure. As evening fell, they found themselves sitting by the fire again. The forced intimacy of the storm created an odd bubble of calm. Elias had brought out his only luxury, a small bottle of bourbon he kept for emergencies. "Medicinal purposes," he said, pouring 2 small measures. She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, hinting at who she might have been before whatever had driven her to his door. "My father used to say the same thing," she said, taking a careful sip. "Was he a drinking man?" "A doctor, actually, in Philadelphia." Her smile faded. "He died 2 years ago. Cholera outbreak." "And your mother?" "The year before. Consumption." Elias nodded, understanding the shorthand of loss. "No other family." She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. "I had a brother, Daniel. He died in the war." "Which side?" "Does it matter now?" "No," Elias admitted. "I reckon it doesn't." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then, surprising himself, he began to talk. "My brother Samuel was barely 18 when he joined up. I tried to stop him, told him to wait, but he was determined to be a hero." The bourbon burned his throat. "He lasted exactly 1 battle. Antietam. Died scared and crying for our mother, who'd been dead 10 years already." "You were with him?" "Held him while he bled out. Took 3 hours." He stared into the fire. "After that, I finished out my time, then came west. Couldn't stand the sight of another uniform, another flag, another person talking about glory and honor. Is that why you live out here alone? Man can't disappoint anyone if there's no one around to disappoint." She made a soft sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. "I understand that feeling. That what you're running from? Disappointment." Her green eyes reflected the firelight. "Something like that." She stood to add wood to the fire, and as she bent, her shirt pulled up slightly. Elias caught sight of scars across her lower back, thin white lines, old but speaking of deliberate cruelty. She noticed his look and quickly straightened, pulling the fabric down. "We all have our ghosts," she said softly. That night, he gave her his bed, a simple frame with a straw mattress, but better than the cot. He tried to protest when she attempted to change the arrangement. "You're injured," he said firmly, "and still recovering from the cold. The cot's fine for me." She looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. As she settled into the bed, she said quietly, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "From your letter. Someone harder, meaner, maybe. Don't mistake this for kindness. Miss Monroe, I'm just not in the habit of letting folk die on my doorstep." But as he lay on the cot, listening to her breathing even out into sleep, he wondered if that was entirely true. Something about this woman had pierced through his carefully built walls, and he wasn't sure whether to reinforce them or let them crumble. The next day brought more of the same: snow, wind, and the strange domestic rhythm they'd fallen into. Lila continued to work despite his protests, and he found himself unconsciously adjusting to her presence. When she winced, reaching for something high, he'd retrieve it without comment. When he came in from checking the livestock, she had hot coffee waiting. On the third night, fever took her. All the exhaustion, cold, and untreated injuries finally demanded their due. Elias woke to the sound of her delirious muttering and found her burning up, tangled in sweat-soaked blankets. He spent the night bathing her face with cool water, forcing willow bark tea between her lips, and listening to her fevered ramblings. She called for her father, for Daniel, and for someone named Catherine. But mostly, she begged someone named Richard to stop. Please stop. She'd be good. She promised. The pieces of her story began forming a picture Elias liked less and less. By dawn, the fever broke. She woke to find him sitting beside the bed, dark circles under his eyes. "You stayed," she whispered. "You were sick. Still, thank you." He stood abruptly, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Storm's passing. Another day or two. We can make it to town." The fear that flashed across her face was unmistakable. "I told you, I can't. Then tell me why." His voice was harder than he intended. "You show up half dead at my door, claiming to be a bride I don't remember ordering. You're running from something, or someone. If I'm harboring you, I deserve to know what's coming." She struggled to sit up, pulling the blankets around her like armor. "His name is Richard Thornton, a businessman from Boston. Very wealthy, very connected." "Your husband?" "No." The word came out fierce. "Never my husband, whatever papers he might have. But he claims otherwise. My father owed him money, gambling debts he kept hidden from us. After father died, Mr. Thornton came to collect. When he found there was no money, he proposed an arrangement." Elias's jaw tightened. He had papers drawn up, a marriage contract. I refused to sign, but—" She touched her ribs unconsciously. "He has ways of being persuasive. So, you ran. I stole what money I could and bought passage west, found your letter at a matrimonial agency in St. Louis. It seemed like fate, a place so remote even he couldn't find me. But you think he's looking? I know he is. Richard Thornton doesn't like losing his possessions." The bitter way she said possessions told Elias everything he needed to know. He stood and paced to the window. The storm was indeed passing, leaving behind a world transformed by white. In a few days, travel would be possible again. He could take her to Cedar Falls, put her on a stage to— where? California? Oregon? Somewhere Thornton's reach couldn't extend. Or he could let her stay. The thought surprised him. He'd spent 5 years building his solitude, and here he was considering shattering it for a woman he'd known less than a week. "Elias?" Her voice was small, uncertain. He turned to find her watching him with those green eyes, wary but hopeful. "You can stay through winter," he heard himself say. "Come spring, we'll figure out something more permanent. But there are rules. This is my home. We're not what that letter promised. You work. I provide shelter and protection. Nothing more." "I understand," she said quickly. "Thank you. I won't." "And no more working yourself to exhaustion. You're no good to either of us dead." A ghost of that smile appeared again. "Yes, sir." He grunted and turned back to the window, wondering what the hell he'd just agreed to. Behind him, he heard her settle back into the bed, and, despite himself, felt something in his chest ease at the sound. The storm was passing, but Elias had the feeling another one was just beginning. The blizzard arrived 3 days after their conversation, worse than anything Elias had seen in his 5 years on the mountain. The wind screamed like a banshee, driving snow horizontally past the windows until the world outside disappeared into a solid wall of white. The temperature plummeted so severely that ice formed on the inside walls despite the roaring fire. "We're not going anywhere for a while," Elias said, checking their supplies. He'd laid in provisions for winter, but only for one person, with careful rationing. They might stretch it. Lila stood beside him, calculating. "If we cut portions and supplement with whatever preserved goods you have stored, we should manage." He glanced at her, surprised by her practical assessment. Most women would have panicked. But then, he was learning that Lila Monroe was not most women. The enforced proximity of the storm created an intimacy neither had expected. They moved around each other in the small space like dancers learning the steps, careful not to touch. Maintaining the boundaries Elias had set, but awareness hummed between them. The catch of breath when they passed too close, the lingering glances when each thought the other wasn't looking. On the second night of the blizzard, Lila found his books, a small collection he'd accumulated from trading posts and abandoned homesteads. Her face lit up like a child at Christmas. "May I?" she asked, running her fingers reverently over the spines. "Help yourself." She selected a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets and settled by the fire. After a moment's hesitation, Elias joined her with his own book, a treatise on animal husbandry he'd been meaning to finish. "You're educated," he observed, watching how easily she read. "My father believed in education for women. It scandalized our neighbors." A sad smile crossed her face. "Mother used to say it would ruin my marriage prospects. I suppose she was right." "Their loss." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Lila looked up, startled, and their eyes met across the small space. The moment stretched between them, taut as a bowstring, before Elias deliberately returned to his book, but he felt her gaze on him a moment longer before she too looked away. On the fourth night, the cabin felt smaller than ever. They'd run through their usual evening routines, and now sat by the fire with nothing but time and awareness between them. Lila had been quieter than usual all day, and Elias found himself uncharacteristically concerned. "You hurting?" he asked gruffly. She shook her head, but he saw her unconsciously touch her ribs. The bruises had faded to yellow-green, but he knew they still pained her. "I've been thinking about Richard," she said quietly. "About what he might do when spring comes." "Let me worry about that. He's not a man who gives up easily. He has money, connections. He could hire men." I said, "Let me worry about it." His tone was sharper than intended, and he saw her flinch, gentling his voice. He added, "I've faced worse than some soft-handed Eastern businessman." "You don't know him." "No, but I know men like him. They're tough when they hold all the cards. When they have other men to do their dirty work, take that away." He shrugged. "Most of them fold like a bad poker hand." She studied him in the firelight. "You really aren't afraid of anything, are you?" "I wouldn't say that." "What does scare you, then?" The question hung in the air between them. Elias stared into the fire, debating whether to answer honestly. "Finally," he said. "Losing people, getting attached and watching them leave? Or worse, watching them die." "Is that why you live alone?" "Part of it." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly he almost missed it, she began to sing. Her voice was untrained but sweet, carrying an old ballad about lost love and longing. The melody filled the cabin, wrapping around them both like a warm blanket. When she finished, the silence seemed deeper than before. "My mother used to sing that," she said. "On winter nights when Father was making rounds, Daniel and I would sit by her feet. She trailed off, lost in memory. You miss them. Every day. Don't you miss having people? Family? Can't miss what you don't let yourself want. She turned to look at him fully. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. It's practical. It's lonely. He had no answer for that, because she was right. The loneliness had become such a part of him he'd forgotten what it felt like not to carry it. They sat in silence until the fire burned low. As Lila rose to go to bed, she paused beside his chair. For a moment, her hand hovered over his shoulder, not quite touching. "Good night, Elias," she said softly. "Good night." After she'd gone to bed, he sat staring into the dying embers, aware of her breathing in the darkness, of the way her presence had filled all the empty corners of his life. The walls he'd built so carefully were cracking, and he didn't know whether to shore them up or let them fall. The next morning brought a brief respite in the storm. Elias needed to check on the horses in the lean-to attached to the cabin. Lila insisted on helping, despite his protests. "I grew up with horses," she said, pulling on his spare coat. "I can manage." Outside, the world had been transformed into an alien landscape of white. Drifts reached halfway up the cabin walls. They waded through knee-deep snow to the lean-to, where his two horses, a sturdy mare named Bess and a gelding called Chimney, waited patiently. Lila went straight to them, murmuring softly, running gentle hands over their sides. The horses, normally skittish with strangers, accepted her touch immediately. "They like you," Elias observed. "Animals are honest. They don't pretend to be something they're not." She fed Bess a handful of oats. "Unlike people." They worked together in comfortable silence, mucking stalls and distributing feed. When they finished, Lila leaned against Bess's warm side, suddenly dizzy. "When's the last time you ate a full meal?" Elias demanded, steadying her. Yesterday? You've been giving me your portions." It wasn't a question. He'd suspected but hadn't wanted to confront it. "You need your strength more than I do. You have to maintain this place. Damn foolish woman." The words came out rough with worry. "What good does it do if you starve yourself?" "I've survived on less." The matter-of-fact way she said it made his chest tight with an emotion he didn't want to name. Back inside, he insisted on making their meal himself, dividing the portions equally under her watchful eye. They ate together at the small table, knees almost touching in the cramped space. "Tell me about before," he said suddenly. "Before Thornton, when you were happy." Her face softened. "We had a house in Germantown. Nothing grand, but comfortable. Mother grew roses in the garden, terrible clay soil, but she coaxed them to bloom anyway. Father would come home from his rounds smelling of carbolic and pipe tobacco. Daniel." She smiled. Daniel wanted to be a lawyer. He had this passionate sense of justice, always defending the underdog. Sounds like it ran in the family. "What do you mean? You could have signed Thornton's papers, taken the easy path. Most would have." "Would you have?" "No, but I'm stubborn to the point of stupidity sometimes." "Sometimes?" She raised an eyebrow. Teasing. He felt his mouth twitch, almost a smile. When was the last time anyone had teased him? "Fine, most times." That night, the storm reached its crescendo. The wind was so fierce it seemed the cabin might lift off its foundations. They huddled close to the fire, trying to ignore the way the walls groaned under the assault. "Elias?" Lila's voice was small in the darkness. "I'm frightened." He looked at her, really looked at her. In the firelight, she seemed younger, more vulnerable. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand. "Cabins stood through worse than this," he said. "We'll be fine." She gripped his hand tightly, and they sat that way for a long time, drawing comfort from the simple human contact. When a particularly vicious gust shook the cabin, she moved closer, until their shoulders touched. He should have pulled away, should have maintained the distance he'd insisted on. Instead, he found himself shifting to accommodate her, letting her lean into his solid warmth. "Tell me something," she said. "Something good, a memory." Elias was quiet, sorting through the before times. looking for something untainted by loss. Summer when I was 12, he began slowly. Samuel was just a baby. Our parents took us to the county fair. There was this carousel, painted horses going round and round. I thought it was the most magical thing I'd ever seen. Begged my father for a ride until he finally gave in. Did you enjoy it? Loved every second. Felt like flying. Samuel was too young, but I promised him that, when he was bigger, I'd take him. His voice roughened. Never got the chance. Lila squeezed his hand. You gave him something better. You were there with him at the end. He wasn't alone. Lot of good it did him. It did. Trust me. Being alone at the end. It's the worst thing. Something in her voice made him look down at her. Your father? I was at the hospital when word came about Daniel. By the time I got home, she swallowed. The neighbors had already taken him away. Without conscious thought, Elias put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her closer. She fit against his side like she belonged there, and warning bells rang in his head. This was dangerous. This was exactly what he'd sworn to avoid. But with the storm raging outside and her warmth pressed against him, he couldn't bring himself to pull away. Sing again, he said roughly. That song from before. She tilted her head to look up at him, and he became acutely aware of how close they were. Her green eyes were dark in the firelight, her lips slightly parted. The air between them crackled with possibility. Then she smiled softly and began to sing, her voice weaving through the storm sounds like a thread of gold. Elias closed his eyes and let himself have this moment, this unexpected gift of human connection in his self-imposed exile. Tomorrow he would rebuild his walls. Tomorrow he would remember why he'd chosen solitude. But tonight, with the blizzard sealing them in their own private world, he held her close and let her voice chase away the ghosts. When the song ended, they stayed as they were, neither willing to break the spell. The fire burned lower, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the storm began its slow retreat. But inside the cabin, another storm was building, one made of longing and loneliness finally finding its match. Elias? She whispered. Yeah, thank you. For what? For not sending me away, for giving me shelter when you had every reason not to. He was quiet for a long moment, then, barely audible, maybe you're the one giving me shelter. She lifted her head to look at him, and the naked hope in her eyes nearly undid him. They stared at each other, balanced on the edge of something irreversible. Then a log shifted in the fire, breaking the moment. Elias cleared his throat and gently withdrew his arm. Storm's easing. We should get some rest. She nodded, understanding the dismissal, but he caught the flash of disappointment in her eyes. As she rose to go to bed, she paused. Good night. Elias, sweet dreams. After she'd gone, he sat alone in the dying firelight, his arm still warm where she'd leaned against him. The cabin felt empty again. Despite her presence just feet away, he'd made a mistake letting her close. Come morning, he'd reestablish the boundaries, make things clear. But as he finally made his way to his own cold cot, he knew he was lying to himself. The damage was already done. Lila Monroe had slipped past his defenses as surely as she'd slipped through the storm to his door. And God help him, he wasn't sure he wanted to keep her out anymore. The morning after the storm brought crystalline air and brilliant sunshine that made the snow-covered world gleam like diamonds. Elias woke with a resolve to reestablish the boundaries that had blurred the night before. He rose early, started the fire, and was already working outside when Lila emerged from sleep. She found him repairing the chicken coop, his movements sharp and efficient. His face closed off in a way it hadn't been the previous evening. Morning, she said softly. He grunted acknowledgement without looking up. Coffee's on. The cold distance in his voice stung more than the winter air. Lila wrapped the coat tighter around herself and retreated inside, understanding the message. Whatever had passed between them in the storm's intimacy was to be forgotten in daylight. For 3 days, Elias maintained his walls. He spoke only when necessary, spent long hours outside despite the cold, and retired early to avoid sitting by the fire with her. Lila didn't push, didn't question. She simply continued her quiet routine, cooking, cleaning, mending, while the space between them grew heavy with unspoken words. On the fourth morning, Elias announced he needed to hunt. Fresh meat would supplement their dwindling stores. And, truthfully, he needed distance from the cabin's confining walls and Lila's wounded eyes. "I'll be back by nightfall," he said, checking his rifle. "Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone." "Be careful," she said quietly. He paused at the door, almost turning back, then forced himself out into the cold. The mountain was hushed under its blanket of snow. Elias tracked a small herd of elk to a meadow 2 miles from the cabin, but found himself unable to concentrate on the hunt. His thoughts kept drifting to Lila, the way she'd felt against his side, the trust in her eyes when she'd taken his hand. He was so distracted he almost missed the sound of horses. Training kicked in. He melted into the tree line, rifle ready, watching as 3 riders appeared on the trail below. They were moving slowly, studying the ground, and Elias's blood chilled as he recognized the deliberate pattern of men tracking something or someone. He couldn't make out their faces from this distance, but their quality horses and expensive coats marked them as outsiders. No local would dress so impractically for mountain winter. Keeping to the trees, Elias shadowed them until their path became clear. They were heading toward his valley, toward the cabin, toward Lila. He abandoned caution and cut through the forest, taking paths he knew by heart, racing the riders to home. His lungs burned with cold air and exertion, but he pushed harder, images of Lila alone and defenseless driving him forward. He burst from the tree line just as the riders were approaching the cabin. Lila was outside, gathering firewood, frozen at the sight of the strangers. "Afternoon, miss," the lead rider called out, well-dressed, clean-shaven, with the kind of smooth manner that set Elias's teeth on edge. "We're looking for someone. A woman traveling alone. Dark hair, green eyes. About your height, actually." Lila's knuckles whitened on the axe handle. "Haven't seen anyone like that." The man smiled, cold as the winter sun. "Now that's interesting, because you match the description perfectly. Mrs. Thornton, I presume." "You're mistaken," Lila said steadily. "My name is Hart, Mrs. Elias Hart." Elias stepped out of the trees, rifle casual in his hands but ready. "Something I can help you gentlemen with?" The riders turned, hands moving toward weapons before noting his steady aim. "Mr. Hart?" The leader's smile never wavered. "Your wife and I were just getting acquainted. I'm James Morrison, attorney at law. I represent Mr. Richard Thornton of Boston. Never heard of him? He's quite anxious to locate his wife. She's unwell, suffers from delusions, ran off several weeks ago, and he's terribly worried. Like I said, never heard of him. And that's my wife you're talking to." Morrison studied them both. "Is that so? Married long?" "Long enough," Elias said flatly. "Now, you're on my property. Time to move along." "Of course, but first—" Morrison reached into his coat, and Elias raised the rifle slightly. The lawyer froze. "Just papers. Mr. Hart. A legal document I think you should see." "Don't need to see any papers. You need to leave. It's a warrant." Morrison continued smoothly. "For the arrest of one Lila Monroe, also known as Lila Thornton, on charges of theft and attempted murder." Lila made a small sound. Elias kept his expression neutral. "Like I said, don't know any Lila Monroe. That's my wife, Lila Hart. Been married near on 6 months now. Check the church records in Cedar Falls if you doubt me." Morrison's eyes glittered. "I just might do that, and if I find those records don't exist, then you'll find I don't take kindly to men who threaten my wife." Elias shifted the rifle meaningfully. "Storm's coming in. You boys best head back to town while you can." The 3 men exchanged glances. They were city men, soft despite their hired tough appearance. The mountain, the armed man, the gathering clouds. It all added up to a fight they weren't prepared for. "We'll be back," Morrison promised. "With the sheriff next time." "You do that. Sheriff Tucker's a friend. He'll be interested to hear about outsiders harassing local women." They wheeled their horses and left. But Elias knew they'd return. He waited until they were out of sight before lowering the rifle. Lila stood trembling, the axe forgotten at her feet. Attempted murder. Inside. Now. Once in the cabin with the door barred, she collapsed into a chair. "I didn't try to kill him. I defended myself. He was forcing himself on me. I grabbed a letter opener, struck out blindly. There was blood, and I ran." "How bad?" "I don't know. Bad enough that he fell. I didn't stay to check." Elias paced, thinking. "They'll be back. Tomorrow. Maybe the day after. I'll leave. Tonight. You'll freeze before you make it 5 miles. He stopped pacing. Decision made. "We need to make this marriage story real." She looked up at him, green eyes wide. "What?" "Cedar Falls has a justice of the peace. We ride down tomorrow, make it official. Morrison can check all the records he wants after that." "Elias, you can't. I won't let you." "It's practical." He cut her off. "A legal marriage protects us both, makes their warrant harder to enforce. Sheriff Tucker's a good man, but he follows the law. If you're legally my wife, it complicates things. And after, when this is over, annulment, divorce, whatever you want." The words came out harder than intended. She was quiet for a long moment. "You'd do that? Marry me to protect me from him? I gave you shelter. This is just more shelter." But it was more than that. And they both knew it. The air between them crackled with everything unsaid. "All right," she whispered. That night, they prepared for the journey to town. Elias cleaned his weapons, packed supplies. Lila mended her least damaged dress, trying to make herself presentable for a wedding neither had planned. As they worked, the walls between them crumbled further. Facing danger together had stripped away pretense. "I should tell you," Lila said quietly, "in case it matters. What Richard did, I fought him off before he could—" She trailed off, cheeks flushing. Understanding dawned. "Lila, that doesn't matter to me. What matters is he hurt you, scared you. That's enough. Some men would think differently. I'm not some men." She smiled sadly. "No, you're not." Later, sitting by the fire for what might be their last quiet evening, Lila asked, "Why did you really answer that matrimonial advertisement when you were drunk?" Elias stared into the flames. "Loneliness, I suppose, gets heavy after a while. Carrying it, that night, with the whiskey. I let myself imagine having someone to share the load. And now—" He looked at her then, really looked at her. Firelight caught in her dark hair, illuminated the strength in her fine-boned face. She'd faced so much, survived so much, yet still had kindness in her eyes. "Now I remember why I chose to be alone," he said roughly. "Easier that way. Easier isn't always better. No, but it's safer." She rose, moving to stand before him. "I've been safe my whole life. Safe and proper and careful. Look where it got me." Her voice dropped. "Maybe I don't want safe anymore." The invitation in her eyes was clear. Elias gripped the arms of his chair, fighting the urge to reach for her. "Lila, I know what you said. I know this is just protection, just paper. But we might die tomorrow. Richard's men might catch us on the road. The sheriff might arrest me anyway." She knelt before his chair, placing her hands over his. "Tonight, can't we just be?" He turned his hands to capture hers. "You don't know what you're asking. I'm asking for one night where we stop pretending, where we acknowledge what's between us. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we go back to the arrangement, the practical marriage, the boundaries." Her thumb stroked over his knuckles. "But tonight—" Elias studied her face, seeing determination mixed with vulnerability. She was offering him a gift, herself, without conditions or expectations. Just two lonely souls finding comfort in the darkness. His resistance crumbled. Standing, he drew her up with him. With one hand, he cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "You sure?" I've never been more sure of anything. He kissed her then, soft and careful, as if she might break. She made a small sound and pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt. The kiss deepened, weeks of suppressed longing pouring out. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Elias rested his forehead against hers. "Lila." "No words," she whispered. "No promises. Just tonight." He led her to the bed he'd given up for her, that smelled of her lavender soap and the pine sachets she'd made. As he kissed her again, deeper this time, her hands trembled on his shoulders. "You're shaking," he murmured against her lips. "Not from fear," she assured him, with infinite care. He helped her with the buttons of her dress, kissing each inch of skin revealed. She was thin, too thin, ribs visible beneath pale skin, but to him she was beautiful. The scars on her back made his jaw clench with suppressed rage. "Don't," she said, seeing his expression. "Not tonight. Tonight there's just us." So he kissed each scar, each mark of survival, while she ran her fingers through his hair and whispered his name like a prayer. When morning came, they rose and dressed in silence, careful not to touch. The boundaries were back in place. The practical arrangement resumed. But something fundamental had shifted. As they prepared to leave for Cedar Falls and a wedding that would be both real and false, Elias caught her hand. "No regrets?" he asked. She squeezed his fingers once before letting go. "Never." They rode out as the sun climbed higher, toward town and marriage and whatever fate awaited them. Behind them. The cabin stood empty but somehow warmer than it had been in years, holding the echo of two hearts that had found each other in the wilderness and, for one night at least, chosen not to be alone. The ride to Cedar Falls took most of the day through snow-laden trails. They spoke little, each lost in thought about what they were about to do. The intimacy of the previous night hung between them like morning mist, present but untouchable in the harsh light of day. Judge Cornelius Whitman was a spare man with kind eyes who'd known Elias since he first came to the territory. His small office smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. "Marriage, eh?" Whitman studied them over his spectacles. "Bit sudden. Elias, didn't know you were courting. Man makes decisions quick out here." Elias replied evenly. "Winter showed me I'd rather not spend another one alone. And you, miss, this what you want?" Lila met the judge's gaze steadily. "Yes, sir, more than anything." The ceremony was brief, witnessed by Whitman's wife and his clerk. When it came time for rings, Elias produced two simple bands he'd purchased from the general store that morning, practical iron bands that wouldn't draw attention. "Do you, Elias James Hart, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Lila Catherine Monroe, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then, by the authority vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you man and wife." Whitman smiled. "You may kiss your bride. It was meant to be perfunctory, for show." But when Elias's lips touched hers, Lila's hand came up to rest against his cheek, and for a moment the rest of the world fell away. The kiss lingered just a heartbeat longer than necessary before they remembered their audience. "Congratulations, Mrs. Whitman beamed. "You make a handsome couple." After signing the papers and filing the certificate, they stopped at the general store for supplies. News traveled fast in Cedar Falls, and several townspeople offered congratulations. Elias endured it stoically while Lila played the part of the happy bride with surprising ease. "Heard you had visitors yesterday," Sheriff Tucker said, appearing at Elias's elbow while Lila examined fabric. "City fellows asking questions. They found what they were looking for," Elias said carefully. "My wife." Tucker's weathered face creased in a knowing smile. "Funny thing, they seem to think her name was something else. Man can't help what city folks think." "No, I reckon not." Tucker's voice lowered. "They showed me papers. Warrant from Boston. Serious allegations." Elias tensed. "And?" "Told them Montana territory has its own laws. Can't just ride in here with Eastern papers expecting us to jump." Tucker studied him. Still, they'll be back. Probably with a territorial judge's order next time. How long? Week, maybe 2. Depends on how fast they can travel in this weather. Tucker touched his hat brim. Congratulations on your marriage. Elias, you take care of that pretty wife of yours. The ride back to the cabin was tense with urgency. 2 weeks at most before the law came knocking properly. As they crested the ridge above the valley, Elias pulled up short. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney. "Stay here," he ordered, dismounting with rifle ready. But as he approached, the door opened to reveal Jake Pearson, the grizzled trader who supplied him twice a year. "Elias, heard you went and got yourself hitched." Jake grinned through his gray beard. "Came to offer congratulations and see if you needed supplies." Relief flooded through him. "Jake, should have known." Lila rode up, and Jake's eyes widened appreciatively. "Well, I'll be damned. The hermit of Heart Mountain found himself a beauty." Over coffee and the cake Jake had improbably brought, Martha insisted when she heard. They shared the expected pleasantries, but Elias saw Jake's sharp eyes taking in details. Lila's healing bruises, their watchfulness, the way they moved around each other with careful distance despite being newlyweds. When Lila excused herself to tend the horses, Jake's demeanor shifted. How much trouble's following her? Elias considered lying, then opted for partial truth. Enough. The kind that carries badges? Maybe. Jake nodded slowly. Martha's cousin lives up in Canada. Fort Benton area, good land, far from most everything. Man could disappear there if he had need. I'll keep that in mind. You do that. Jake stood to leave. And Elias, that girl looks at you like you hung the moon. Whether you see it or not, don't be a fool. After Jake left, they unpacked supplies in silence. The cabin felt smaller somehow, charged with the knowledge that their time might be limited. As evening fell, they maintained the careful distance that had marked their journey home. "We should talk about what happens when they come back," Lila said finally. "We run," Elias said simply. "Jake mentioned Canada. We could—" "No," her voice was firm. "I won't have you give up your home because of my mistakes. It's just a cabin. It's more than that, and you know it." She moved closer, eyes fierce. "This place, it's your sanctuary. Where you came to heal, I won't take that from you. And I won't let them take you back to him." They stared at each other across the table. Both stubborn, both afraid. "There might be another way," Lila said quietly. "If Richard is dead—" "You said you didn't check." "I didn't. But if he died from his wounds, then I'm a widow, not a runaway wife. The charges might not hold. And if he's alive," she was quiet for a moment, "then we need to make them not want to pursue this, make it more trouble than I'm worth." That night, they worked side by side preparing defenses, checking weapons, securing the cabin, planning escape routes. The easy partnership they'd developed over weeks of living together served them well. They moved in sync, anticipating each other's needs without words. As the night grew late, Elias found himself watching her clean his spare pistol with practiced efficiency. "Where'd you learn to handle firearms?" "My father. He said a woman should know how to protect herself." A bitter smile crossed her face. "Lot of good it did me. You're here. You survived. That's everything." She looked up at him, and something in her expression made his breath catch. "Is it?" The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. They'd been careful all day to maintain distance, to pretend the previous night hadn't happened. But here in the lamplight, with danger approaching and time running short, pretense seemed foolish. "Lila." "I know," she interrupted. "I know what we agreed. But Elias, if these are our last days—" "They won't be. You can't promise that." She set down the pistol and moved around the table to him. "You can't promise they won't drag me back, or that you won't be hurt trying to stop them, or that we'll ever see each other again after this is over." He caught her hands as she reached for him. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking you to stop pretending you don't feel this too. Stop acting like last night was just comfort between strangers." Her green eyes searched his. I love you, Elias. I know that wasn't the arrangement, but he silenced her with a kiss, fierce and desperate. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. You think I don't feel it? He asked roughly. You think I haven't been half mad with wanting you since you stumbled through that door? But feeling it and acting on it are different things. Why? Because I can't lose someone else I love. I can't watch you die or leave so instead you'll push me away. Keep me at arm's length until they take me? She pulled back to look at him. That's not living, Elias. That's just existing. It's safer. Damn safer. The profanity from her lips startled them both. I've been safe. Richard kept me very safe. Locked up, controlled, beaten when I disobeyed. Is that what you're offering? A different kind of cage? No. The word came out horrified. Lila, no, You're scared. Her voice gentled. So am I. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe and alone. He studied her face, the determination, the hope, the love she wasn't trying to hide anymore. His carefully constructed walls didn't stand a chance against the truth in her eyes. I love you too, he admitted. God help me, I do. This time when they came together, it was different. Not the desperate passion of the night before, but something deeper, a claiming, a promise, a refusal to let fear win. They made love slowly, memorizing each touch, each whispered endearment. Afterward, they lay entwined, Lila's head on his chest, his fingers combing through her dark hair. Whatever comes, she said quietly, I want you to know these weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. He tightened his arms around her. We're going to have more weeks, years, decades. Promise? I promise I'll fight for it, for us. She lifted her head to kiss him softly. That's enough. But even as they held each other, both knew the world wouldn't leave them in peace much longer. The sound of wind against the windows seemed to carry whispers of approaching danger, of choices that would have to be made. In the dying firelight, Elias made his own silent vow. He'd lost too much already, his brother, his parents, his faith in humanity. He wouldn't lose Lila too. Not to Richard Thornton, not to the law, not to his own fears. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The following days took on a bittersweet quality. They worked side by side, talked more freely, allowed themselves small touches and stolen kisses. The pretense was gone, replaced by something real and precious and terrifying in its intensity. On the third night, Lila stood by the window watching snow fall softly outside. It's beautiful here, she said. Peaceful. Elias came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. It never felt that way before you came. She leaned back against him. What did it feel like? Empty. Cold. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Like a grave I was living in. And now it feels like home. She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. Whatever happens, remember that? You gave me a home when I had nothing. You gave me love when I thought I'd never feel it again. That's worth any price. Don't talk like that, like you're saying goodbye. I'm saying thank you, and I love you. In case I don't get another chance, he kissed her then, pouring all his fear and love and determination into it. When they finally broke apart, he held her face between his hands. You'll get 1,000,000 more chances, I swear it. But even as he spoke the words, they both heard it, the sound of horses approaching through the snow. Multiple horses, moving with purpose. Their time had run out. The horses stopped outside the cabin. Elias counted at least 6 riders from the sound. He checked his rifle while Lila loaded the spare pistol with steady hands. Remember the plan, he said quietly. If things go bad, I'm not leaving you. Lila. Mr. Hart, Morrison's smooth voice called from outside. We've returned as promised, with proper authority this time. Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle casual but ready. Sheriff Tucker was there, looking unhappy, along with Morrison and 4 deputies. A 7th man remained mounted slightly apart, well-dressed, with cold eyes that made Elias's skin crawl before he even spoke. Hello, Lila. The man's cultured Boston accent cut through the mountain air. "You've led me quite a chase. Richard Thornton, alive and barely marked, save for a healing scar on his neck." Lila appeared in the doorway, chin raised despite the tremor in her hands. "Richard, my dear wife, I've been so worried." Thornton's voice dripped false concern. "Running off in your confused state. Thank goodness we found you before you could hurt yourself, or anyone else. I'm not your wife," Lila said clearly. "I'm married to Elias Hart." "Show them the papers." "Sheriff." Tucker shifted uncomfortably. "I've seen the papers, ma'am, but Mr. Thornton here has papers too. From Boston. Dated earlier." "Fraudulent papers," Lila protested. "Signed under duress. That's a matter for the courts to decide." Morrison interjected smoothly. "We have a territorial judge's order to return Mrs. Thornton to Boston for trial." "Trial for what?" Elias demanded. "Attempted murder, theft, abandonment of wifely duties." Thornton smiled coldly. "She's quite disturbed. Mr. Hart, prone to violent episodes and delusions. I'm sure she told you all manner of wild stories." "Only truth I see is a woman who'd rather freeze to death than stay with you," Elias said flatly. "That tells me enough. Regardless of your feelings, the law is clear." Morrison produced a document. "This orders her remand to our custody for transport back to Boston. She's not going anywhere." Tucker stepped forward. "Elias, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I don't like it either, but the papers are legal. If she goes peaceful-like, stands trial, maybe things work out." "You believe that?" Elias asked him directly. "You think she'll get justice in his city, with his judges, his lawyers?" Tucker's silence was answer enough. "Then we have a problem." The deputies' hands moved to their weapons. Elias didn't flinch. "There's no need for violence," Thornton said, dismounting with casual arrogance. "Lila knows she belongs with me. Don't you, dear?" He walked toward the porch, and Elias saw Lila shrink back involuntarily. That small motion of fear decided everything. "That's close enough," Elias warned, raising the rifle slightly. Thornton stopped, his mask of civility slipping. "You have no idea who you're interfering with. I could buy and sell this entire territory. When I'm done, you'll wish you'd never—" "Richard!" Lila's voice cut through his threat. She stepped past Elias, moving to the edge of the porch. "If I come with you, peacefully, without trouble, will you leave Elias alone?" "No." Elias grabbed her arm. "Absolutely not." She turned to him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "It's the only way. You know it is." "I don't accept that. You promised to protect me. This is how you do it. By letting me protect you too." "How touching," Thornton sneered. "The whore found herself a mountain man to play house with. Tell me, Hart, did she please you? She was always too cold for my tastes, but perhaps crude men have lower standards." The rifle was aimed at Thornton's head before the last word left his mouth. "Elias, no!" Tucker stepped between them. "You shoot him, and nothing saves either of you." "Might be worth it," Elias growled. "Think," Tucker urged. "You kill him now. She hangs for sure, and you alongside her." The standoff stretched taut. Then Lila did something unexpected. She laughed. Not hysterical, but genuinely amused. "You know what, Richard? I was too cold for you because every time you touched me, my skin crawled. Because you're a pathetic little man who has to buy or force everything you claim to own." She stepped down from the porch, moving closer to him. "But with Elias? With a real man? I discovered I'm not cold at all." Thornton's face flushed dark red. His hand moved to strike her, but Elias was already moving. The rifle butt caught Thornton in the stomach, dropping him to his knees in the snow. The deputies drew their weapons. Tucker shouted for calm, and in the chaos, no one noticed Morrison reaching into his coat until the hidden pistol was already out. The shot was impossibly loud in the mountain air, but it wasn't Morrison who fired. Lila stood with Elias's spare pistol smoking in her hand, Morrison clutching his shoulder where her bullet had struck. His weapon fell into the snow. "Nobody move!" Tucker had his own gun out now, trying to restore order. Everyone just calm down. She shot me, Morrison gasped. You all saw it. I saw you draw on my husband, Lila said steadily. I defended him. Justified shooting, Tucker agreed quickly. Man was drawing a hidden weapon. Everyone here saw that, didn't they? He looked meaningfully at his deputies, who nodded reluctantly. Thornton struggled to his feet, rage twisting his features. You'll pay for this, both of you. I'll see you rot in prison. You'll do nothing, a new voice interrupted. Everyone turned to see Jake Pearson emerge from the tree line, accompanied by 3 rough-looking men, trappers by their appearance, all armed. Jake, Elias said, surprised. Heard there might be trouble up this way. Jake spat tobacco juice near Thornton's feet. Boys and I thought we'd check on our neighbor, make sure no outsiders were causing problems. The balance had shifted. 7 against 2 had become 7 against 6, with local knowledge on the mountaineers' side. Tucker, ever the pragmatist, made a decision. Mr. Thornton, I think it's best if you and your men head back to town. Mr. Morrison needs medical attention. This isn't over, Thornton snarled. Actually, it is. Jake produced a letter from his coat. Interesting thing came through the trading post yesterday. Letter from a lawyer in Boston. Seems Mr. Thornton here is under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and false imprisonment. Several young women have come forward with stories. Man's got bigger problems than one runaway bride. Thornton went white. That's impossible. Your business partner thought so too, until he started looking at the books. Jake grinned wolfishly. Turns out when you left Boston in such a hurry, people started asking questions. Wrong questions for you. The fight went out of Thornton. Without his money, his influence, he was just a cruel man standing in snow he wasn't dressed for, facing people who didn't fear him. This proves nothing, he said weakly. Proves enough that you should leave. Tucker said, Now, before I remember that there's a law against filing false legal documents. Morrison, still clutching his shoulder, helped Thornton mount. As they prepared to leave, Thornton looked one last time at Lila. You were nothing before me, he said. You'll be nothing again. Lila stepped closer to Elias, who put his arm around her. I'd rather be nothing with him than everything with you. They watched the group ride away, waiting until they were specks in the distance before anyone relaxed. They'll be back, Tucker warned. Maybe not Thornton himself, but lawyers, paperwork. This kind doesn't give up easy. Let them come. Jake said, By then, might be hard to find the hearts. Lot of territory up here. People get lost all the time. Tucker studied them all, then nodded slowly. I reckon they do at that. He touched his hat. Mrs. Hart, Elias, you folks take care. After Tucker and his deputies left, Jake and his friends lingered. That letter? Elias asked. Jake grinned. Oh, it's real enough. Came looking for information about Thornton's whereabouts? Seems he's wanted back in Boston something fierce. I might have sent a reply mentioning he was headed for California. Terrible how these mountain passes can confuse a man's direction. Jake, Lila began. Don't thank me. Thank Martha. She took one look at you two in town and said, Those young people need help. What Martha wants, Martha gets. He winked. Besides, couldn't let some city bastard mess with my best customer. After they left, Elias and Lila stood alone in their yard. The crisis passed, but its echo remaining. You shot Morrison, Elias said finally. He was going to shoot you. That was a hell of a risk. No greater than you were taking. She turned to face him. I meant what I said. Partners. In everything. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. When I saw him, when I realized he was alive, I know, I thought it was over too. She pulled back to look at him. But it's not. We have time now. To disappear if we need to fight if we have to live if we can. What do you want to do? She looked around at the cabin, the mountains, the sky stretching endless above them. I want to stay, right here, with you, But if that puts you in danger, we stay, he said firmly. This is our home. We'll deal with whatever comes. That night, they sat by the fire, closer than ever. The threat had passed for now, but its shadow had shown them something important. They were stronger together than apart. I've been thinking, Lila said, about what Thornton said, about being nothing. Lila. No, let me finish. He was right in a way. I was nothing when I was with him. Just a possession, a thing to be owned, she smiled. But here, with you, I'm myself. I'm your wife, your partner, your equal. That's everything. Elias kissed her softly. You were never nothing. Not to me. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the tracks of horses and men, blanketing the world in fresh white. Inside, two people who had found each other against all odds held tight and planned their future. Morrison's blood in the snow would wash away come spring. Thornton's threats would fade as his own crimes caught up with him. But what Elias and Lila had built, trust, partnership, love, that would endure. They had fought for each other, chosen each other, claimed each other before witnesses and under law. Now came the rest of their lives. Whatever shape that took, and for the first time in years, Elias' heart looked forward to tomorrow. 2 weeks passed in deceptive quiet. The snow melted enough for easier travel, and Elias took advantage to lay in extra supplies from town. Jake kept them informed. Thornton had indeed left the territory, but Morrison remained in Cedar Falls, recovering from his wound and sending telegrams east. He's building a case, Jake warned during one visit, talking to any judge who'll listen. Elias cleaned his rifle methodically. Let him talk. But Lila grew quieter as the days passed, jumping at unexpected sounds, staring too long out windows. The waiting wore on her more than any confrontation could. One morning, Elias woke to find her side of the bed empty. He found her at the table, writing by lamplight. What's this? She looked up, eyes red-rimmed. A confession, the truth about what happened in Boston. If I turn myself in, tell my side. No. He pulled the paper away. We've been through this. Elias, they won't stop. You heard Jake. Morrison's determined. And Richard, he has too much pride to let this go. Then we leave. Head north like Jake suggested. And spend our lives running, always looking over our shoulders. She stood, pacing. That's not living. That's just another kind of prison. He caught her hands, stilling her movement. What's really going on? She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, I'm late. Late for... Understanding dawned. Oh, it might be nothing. The stress, the travel. But her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. Elias sat heavily, mind reeling. A child. The possibility changed everything. How long? 6 weeks, maybe 7. She watched him anxiously. I know this isn't what you wanted. Complications. He pulled her onto his lap, silencing her with a kiss. Don't apologize for what might be the best news I've had in years. But the danger makes me more determined to end this, properly, permanently. He held her close, feeling her tremble. A child. Lila. Our child. If there is one, I could be wrong. Do you think you are? She shook her head slowly. No, I know my body. Something's different. They sat in silence, adjusting to this new reality. Then Elias stood. Decision made. Get dressed. We're going to town. What? Why? To send our own telegrams. If Morrison wants to play legal games, we'll play too. In Cedar Falls. Elias surprised her by heading not to the telegraph office, but to the small law office of Josiah Winters, the town's only attorney. Elias, Winters greeted them warmly. Mrs. Hart, what can I do for you? Need to hire your services. Elias said, to fight some Boston lawyers. Winters' eyes sharpened with interest as they explained the situation. He took notes, asked pointed questions, and finally leaned back with a thoughtful expression. The prior marriage claim is your biggest problem, he said, if Thornton has documents. Forged documents. Lila insisted. I never signed willingly. Hard to prove, unless... Winters stood, moving to his bookshelf. There's precedent. Cases where duress voids contracts, and this investigation Jake mentioned, if Thornton's facing criminal charges, it strengthens your position. So, we have a chance. More than a chance, but we need depositions. Witnesses to his character. Evidence of coercion. Winters smiled. Lucky for you. I love a challenge. And I particularly dislike men who abuse their power over women. They spent the morning providing detailed statements. Winters proved surprisingly thorough. Drawing out details Lila had been reluctant to share, the systematic isolation, the financial control, the escalating violence. This pattern of behavior is crucial, Winters explained. It establishes that any consent was coerced. As they prepared to leave, Sheriff Tucker appeared. Elias. Need a word. Outside. Tucker's expression was grim. Morrison's been busy. He's got a federal marshal coming. Should be here in 2 days. Federal? Claiming it's an interstate matter. Kidnapping across territorial lines. Tucker spat in disgust. Load a bull, but a federal badge carries weight. Elias felt Lila's hand tighten in his. What do you suggest? Can't tell you to run. That'd be aiding fugitives. Tucker studied the sky. But if I were a man facing federal charges, and I had a pregnant wife to think of, how did you... Martha Pearson. Woman's got an eye for these things. Tucker's weathered face softened. My Ellen had that same look early on. Protective hand on the belly. Careful how she moves. Elias nodded slowly. Thanks for the warning. What warning? We never talked. Tucker touched his hat and ambled away. Back of the cabin. They faced the hardest decision yet. Run and confirm guilt in the law's eyes, or stay and trust a system that had already failed Lila once. I won't have our child born on the run, Lila said firmly. Never knowing a real home. Always afraid. And I won't see you taken back to him. Then we fight. Here. Now. With Winters' help and whatever justice still exists in this country. Elias pulled her close. You're sure? I'm sure I love you. I'm sure this is our home. I'm sure I'd rather die fighting than live running. Her green eyes blazed with determination. Aren't you the one who said we're stronger together? Despite everything. He smiled. When did you get so fierce? The day I decided to live instead of just survive. They spent the next day preparing, not for flight, but for battle. Winters arrived with documents to sign, strategies to discuss. Jake brought news that several Boston newspapers had picked up the Thornton scandal. His partner's singing like a canary, Jake reported gleefully. Turns out your Richard had his fingers in all sorts of pies. False contracts, forged signatures, intimidation. You weren't the first girl he tried to acquire through debt manipulation. Will they testify? Winters asked immediately. Already have, according to this. Jake showed them a newspaper article. 3 women have come forward. Society's in an uproar. Hope bloomed in Lila's chest. Then maybe... The sound of horses cut her off. Many horses, moving fast. Elias grabbed his rifle, but Winters stopped him. No, we do this legally. It's the only way to end it for good. They stepped onto the porch to face a crowd. The federal marshal, a tall, stern man named Garrett, led the group. Morrison was there, smug despite his arm in a sling. Several deputies, and, surprisingly, Judge Whitman. Marshal. Winters stepped forward. I represent Mrs. Hart. Then you can explain why she should come quietly, Garrett replied. I have a warrant for her arrest on charges of attempted murder and theft. I have documentation challenging the validity of those charges, Winters countered, as well as evidence that the complainant is himself under investigation for fraud and coercion. That's a matter for the courts. Indeed it is, which is why I've petitioned for an immediate hearing before Judge Whitman. Winters smiled. The judge has graciously agreed to convene court tomorrow. Morrison sputtered. This is highly irregular. What's irregular is pursuing a woman across territories based on fraudulent claims. Whitman interjected. Marshal Garrett, I'm ordering Mrs. Hart released to her husband's custody pending tomorrow's hearing. Your Honor, are you questioning my authority in my own jurisdiction, Mr. Morrison? The lawyer subsided, but his eyes promised retribution. Mrs. Hart. Garrett addressed Lila directly. You understand that fleeing before the hearing will result in immediate conviction in absentia? I understand. Then I'll see you in court. He turned to go, then paused. For what it's worth, ma'am, I've been reading those Boston papers. Makes a man think twice about who's the real criminal here. After they left, Lila sagged against Elias. Tomorrow, he confirmed. One way or another, it ends. That night, they held each other close, too aware it might be their last night together. Lila traced patterns on his chest, memorizing the feel of him. If things go badly, they won't. But if they do, promise me something. Anything. Take care of yourself. Find happiness again. And if there is a child, her voice broke. There is, he said firmly. And you'll be here to raise it with me, to teach it to be strong like its mother. She kissed him then, pouring all her love and fear and hope into it. They made love slowly, tenderly, speaking with touch what words couldn't convey. Afterward, as dawn approached, Elias spoke into the darkness. I have something for you. He retrieved a small wooden box from his drawer. Inside was a gold wedding ring, delicate and inscribed. It was my mother's, he explained. Been saving it. Figured you deserve better than iron. Lila slipped off the plain band and let him place the gold one on her finger. It's beautiful. She would have loved you. Would have said you were exactly what I needed, someone too stubborn to let me hide forever. I love you, Elias Hart. And I love you, Lila Hart. Whatever tomorrow brings, that won't change. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the day that would determine their fate. As they dressed for court, Elias watched Lila pin up her hair with steady hands, her chin raised despite the fear he knew she felt. His fierce, brave wife. The woman who'd stumbled half-frozen into his life and thawed his frozen heart, who'd given him purpose again, hope again, love again. Who might be carrying his child? Whatever happened in that courtroom, Elias knew one thing for certain. He would not let her face it alone. They would stand together, as they had since that wild winter night when fate and desperation brought her to his door. Together, or not at all. The Cedar Falls courthouse was packed to capacity. Word had spread about the hearing, drawing curious townspeople, traveling merchants, and even homesteaders from the surrounding mountains. Martha Pearson sat in the front row, her presence a comfort to Lila. Judge Whitman called the proceedings to order. This is a preliminary hearing to determine the validity of extradition charges against Mrs. Lila Hart, formerly Miss Lila Monroe. Morrison stood, still favoring his wounded arm. Your Honor, the facts are simple. Mrs. Thornton. Objection. Winters interrupted. The validity of that marriage is precisely what we're here to determine. Sustained. You'll refer to the defendant as Mrs. Hart unless proven otherwise. Morrison's jaw tightened. Mrs. Hart stands accused of attempted murder and theft. She stabbed Mr. Abd. Richard Thornton with a letter opener and stole money and jewelry from his household. Self-defense, Winters countered. And retrieving her own property. We have witnesses, paid employees of Mr. Thornton. Winters stood. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence of Mr. Thornton's character and business practices. Morrison objected furiously, but Whitman allowed it. Winters presented newspaper articles, depositions from Boston, and testimonies from the other women Thornton had targeted. A pattern emerges, Winters said. Mr. Thornton uses debt and coercion to force young women into marriages they don't want. When they resist, he employs violence, hearsay, and speculation. Morrison protested. Then let's hear from Mrs. Hart herself. Lila took the stand, her hand briefly touching Elias's as she passed. Under Winters' gentle questioning, she told her story. Her father's hidden debts, Thornton's demands, the escalating control and violence. "The night I fled," she said quietly. "He came to my room, said it was time I performed my wifely duties. Willing or not, I grabbed the nearest thing, a letter opener from my father's desk. When he lunged at me, I struck out blindly. And the money, my mother's jewelry, which he'd taken, and $40, less than what he'd stolen from my father's medical practice after his death." Morrison's cross-examination was brutal. "You claimed duress, yet you lived in Mr. Thornton's house for months, wore clothes he bought, ate food he provided. As his prisoner," Lila replied steadily, "with the locks on my door and guards at the gates." "Guards? Or servants ensuring your safety? Is that what you call men who drag a woman back when she tries to leave? You could have gone to the authorities. With what proof?" "Mr. Thornton owned half the police force through bribes and favors." "So you say, yet you produced no evidence. Because I was fleeing for my life." Lila's composure cracked. "Because I knew if I stayed another day, I'd either be dead or wish I was," the courtroom murmured. Elias's hands clenched on his knees, fighting the urge to intervene. Morrison pressed on. "And this supposed marriage to Mr. Hart, how convenient that it occurred just as the law caught up with you. I placed an advertisement seeking a wife last year." Elias spoke up, ignoring Whitman's gavel. "Have the letter to prove it," Lila answered. "We corresponded. She came west to marry me. After stabbing her legal husband." "I am her legal husband," Elias said firmly. "And any man who'd force himself on a woman deserves what he gets." "Mr. Hart," Whitman warned, "you're out of order." But the damage was done. The crowd was clearly on Lila's side, murmuring approval. Morrison, sensing the tide turning, played his final card. "Your Honor, regardless of circumstances, the fact remains that the defendant struck Mr. Thornton with a weapon. That's attempted murder under Boston law." "Under Boston law, perhaps." Winters rose. "But we're not in Boston. Under territorial law, a person has the right to defend themselves against assault. Mrs. Hart was protecting her virtue and her life. She was a hysterical woman who—" "Objection." Winters's voice cracked like a whip. "Marshal Garrett, you've been investigating this case. What did you find?" The federal marshal stood reluctantly. "Found 3 witnesses in Boston willing to testify that Thornton boasted about breaking his new mare. Pardon the language. Ladies, also found that the marriage documents had irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" "The witness signatures. One was from a man who died 2 months before the supposed ceremony." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Morrison went pale. "Furthermore," Garrett continued, "received a telegram this morning. Richard Thornton was arrested yesterday in Boston. Seems his business partner provided evidence of extensive fraud, including forged marriage documents for multiple women." The courtroom erupted. Whitman gavelled for order. "Your Honor," Winters said above the noise, "I move for immediate dismissal of all charges." Morrison tried one last objection, but Whitman cut him off. "Mr. Morrison, you've brought this court falsified documents and pursued an innocent woman on behalf of a criminal. Motion granted. All charges against Mrs. Hart are dismissed." The gavel fell with finality. Lila swayed, and Elias was there instantly, catching her, holding her as tears of relief streamed down her face. The courtroom dissolved into chaos, people cheering, Morrison slinking out. Marshal Garrett approaching to offer his apologies. "Ma'am," Garrett touched his hat. "Sorry for the trouble. If it helps, Thornton's looking at 20 years minimum. He won't be bothering anyone again." Outside the courthouse, the Harts were surrounded by well-wishers. Jake Pearson pushed through to embrace them both. "Knew it would work out," he said gruffly. "Martha never doubted for a minute." "Neither did I," Elias said, his arm tight around Lila. "Not for a minute." That was a lie, but a kind one. The truth was, he'd been terrified. But standing here in the spring sunshine, his wife safe in his arms, the threat finally ended. The fear seemed like something from another lifetime. "Home?" Lila asked, looking up at him. "Home," he confirmed. They rode back to the cabin as husband and wife, truly and legally, with no shadows following them. The mountains had never looked more beautiful, the sky never more blue. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the peaks gold and rose, Lila placed Elias's hand on her still flat stomach. "It's real now," she said softly. "All of it. Our marriage, our freedom, our future, our child," he added, wonder in his voice. "Are you happy?" He turned to look at her, his mail-order bride who'd arrived half-frozen and desperate, who'd brought warmth back to his cold life, who'd fought beside him and for him. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said honestly. "I spent 5 years dead inside, Lila, just existing. Then you knocked on my door and brought me back to life. You saved me first. We saved each other." She leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching night creep across their valley. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called. The horses nickered softly in the barn. Simple sounds of home, of peace, of life continuing. "What are you thinking?" Lila asked. "About Samuel, wishing he could have met you. He would have loved your spirit." "Tell me more about him. I want our child to know about their uncle." So Elias talked. About childhood adventures. About Samuel's laugh. His dreams of seeing the ocean. For the first time, the memories brought more sweetness than pain. "He sounds wonderful," Lila said when he finished. "He was, and if we have a son, Samuel Elias Hart." She finished. "And if it's a girl, what was your mother's name?" "Catherine. Catherine Hope Hart, for the hope that brought you to my door." Lila kissed him softly. Perfect. Spring came fully to the mountains, melting the last snow, bringing wildflowers and new life. Elias added a room to the cabin, whistling as he worked. Lila planted a garden, coaxing vegetables from the mountain soil like her mother had coaxed roses from clay. Their first harvest was small but precious, proof that they could grow things, nurture life, create abundance where there had been only survival. On a warm September morning, with Martha Pearson serving as midwife and Elias holding her hand, Lila brought Catherine Hope Hart into the world. The baby's cries filled the cabin, strong and healthy and perfect. "She's beautiful," Elias whispered, touching his daughter's tiny fingers with reverent wonder. "Just like her mother. She has your eyes," Lila said tiredly. "That determined look. God help us then, 2 stubborn women under one roof." 3, Martha corrected, bustling about. "Don't forget me. Someone needs to teach this little one proper manners since you 2 will spoil her rotten." They laughed, the sound bright in the morning air. Outside, the mountains stood eternal guard, but inside the cabin was warmth and love and family. Later, as Lila dozed with the baby, Elias stepped onto the porch. The valley stretched before him, the same view he'd stared at for 5 lonely years. But now, it looked different. Now it wasn't a place to hide from the world, but a place to build one. Jake appeared, leading his mule up the trail. "Heard the little one arrived. Martha sent me for supplies." He studied Elias's face. "You look different. Feel different. Happy suits you, friend." About time, too. That winter, they received an unexpected package. Inside was a letter from a Boston law firm and a bank draft for a considerable sum. Thornton's assets were liquidated to pay his victims. Winters explained when they asked, "This is your portion. Justice may be slow, but sometimes it does arrive." Lila looked at the numbers in disbelief. We could buy more land, build a real ranch. Or we could donate it," Elias suggested. "Set up something for women like you or women who need a place to run to." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, oh, yes, the Monroe House, for my parents." "The Monroe Hart House," Elias corrected, "for second chances." And so it began. What started as one desperate woman finding shelter became a haven for others. The cabin grew into a proper house, then buildings for guests, then a working ranch that gave women skills and independence. Catherine grew up surrounded by stories of courage, raised by parents who'd fought for their love and won. She learned to ride from her father, to read from her mother, and to stand up for herself from both. On her 5th birthday, as they sat around a table full of neighbors and friends, Lila caught Elias's eye across the crowded room. So much had changed since that terrible winter night when she'd stumbled to his door. "No regrets?" he asked quietly, echoing his question from years before. She looked around, at their daughter laughing with the other children, at the women they'd helped who now helped others, at the life they'd built from loneliness and fear. "Never," she said, taking his hand, "not for a single moment." The mountains stood witness to their joy. These peaks that had seen so much sorrow transformed into something beautiful. Where once there had been isolation was now community. Where once there had been fear was now love. And in a small cemetery on the hillside, beneath a stone marked "Samuel Hart, beloved brother," wildflowers grew in abundance, tended by gentle hands and watered by grateful tears, proof that even in death, love continues to grow. The mail-order bride who'd arrived frozen and desperate had become the warm heart of Heart Mountain, and the hermit who'd chosen solitude had learned that some storms bring blessings in disguise, delivering exactly what we need when we need it most. Their love story became legend in those parts, told around campfires and in general stores, proof that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a simple knock on the door and the courage to answer it.